he recently took a big trip to Panama for the Summit of the Americas. And a lot of people said, hey, this is a big deal now. The president last year announcing that he was normalizing relations with Cuba. The State Department making moves to take Cuba off the list of terrorist sponsors. And finally, an opportunity for the President of the United States to meet face-to-face with the president of Cuba, Raul Castro, in the first meaningful meeting since, 1956?
1958.
1958. As you point out in your piece, that meeting also occurred in Panama, and so we've kind of come full circle. This president sitting down with Raul in a meeting that was certainly planned but wasn't announced. But nobody was horribly surprised. They thought that they were both going to be there, and since relations are mending, why not go ahead and figure out if the two of them can iron out some of the differences? Did they?
Well, did they iron out differences on concrete issues, I think, remains to be determined. There weren't any major policy announcements out of this visit, although some had been anticipated. You mentioned the state sponsors of terror list, and just before the president arrived in Panama, he was actually in Jamaica, and he was asked about this, and he said, look, the State Department's finished their review. We all kind of know that the State Department has recommended that Cuba be taken off of this list, but he said, I'm still studying the details. I haven't really made a decision one way or the other. So no concrete announcements, but the big symbolic announcement was the fact, as you mentioned, that for the first time in more than half a century, we had a U.S. leader and a Cuban leader sitting down, making common cause, appearing to be friendly, praising one another, discussing what they have in common as opposed to, what makes them arch enemies. And it was really a historic moment, one that for generations of people who remember just how high tensions got between Cuba and the U.S. during the Cold War would have seemed unimaginable. And from a symbolic standpoint, I think it really served to put a lot of new momentum into this push by Obama and President Castro to try and normalize relations between the U.S. There had been some speculation that ever since that announcement in December that things have kind of stalled out a little bit, petered out. There hasn't been movement, as both presidents had wanted, on reopening embassies in Havana and Washington. They really wanted to get that step done before this summit so that they could say, look, we've reopened embassies in each other's capitals. We're really on our way. That hasn't materialized. The state sponsor thing's still a lingering issue. Americans still have a lingering issue over freedom of movement for American diplomats in Havana. So a whole lot still to be worked out between these two countries. But at least from the symbolic 30,000-foot level, this was a major step towards closer relations.
I think the thinking is the symbolism can then pave the way towards real concrete policy changes. What was it like to be there for this? All the stories I read, including your story, made it feel like you could kind of feel the history being made, because for all of our lives, I mean, you and I are like 22, and for
let's go with that.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, certainly for even the president's entire life, we've had this embargo on Cuba, made tremendous effort to try to overturn the Cuban government. And here they are meeting for the first time in all these years. What did it feel like?
Historic is certainly one word for it. Surreal. You mentioned the fact that that a lot of this started before the president was born. That was a point the president made sure to make, saying, basically, the Cold War has long been over, and look, I'm not interested in fighting battles that started before I was even born. The subtext there being kind of like, not my bad, like, I didn't do this, I'm cleaning it up, but don't blame me for what was decided by many presidents ago. And there was a fascinating moment. Perhaps the more interesting moment, even in this sit-down between these two leaders, was what came about an hour earlier when Castro was delivering his, all these leaders get to give their big speeches to this plenary session of all of the other leaders and basically just grandstand for a period of time. And he went off for a good half hour or so, just in exhaustive detail, listing the history of perceived Cuban grievances against the U.S., starting back in, I think he started in 1898 and going through the Bay of Pigs and every attempt by an American president to try and undermine or overthrow a Cuban government. And there have been many, let's just face it. And we're all kind of sitting there thinking, maybe this isn't going in
off the tracks.
Yeah, this isn't exactly paving the path for a real, happy meeting between the two folks. And then about a half an hour into this speech, Castro, his energy is sort of building and he's reaching this fever pitch. And all of a sudden he kind of loses himself and he takes a step back and he says, I'm sorry. I have to apologize to President Obama. And we're all thinking, this has got to be some sarcastic.
Like, sorry, not sorry.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And he said, I've told President Obama that I get very emotional when I speak about the revolution. And I lost myself a little bit. But you know what? I'm sorry. This isn't President Obama's fault. He wasn't even born when this happened. He's an honorable man. I've read his autobiography. I mean, can you imagine? Raul Castro sitting.
I read it and listened to the audiobook.
Curling up with, Dreams from My Father in, his presidential palace in Havana apparently happened. And praising the president effusively and saying he's looking for the right thing here. This isn't his fault, and we're going to try and move forward. And once you had that about face, it not only affirmed that Cuba is still interested in this détente, but also I think helped all of us who were there to witness it understand that for the Cuban leadership, this isn't just a pragmatic issue about, what's the political advantage or disadvantage to restoring relations. There really is an emotional level to this that's perhaps difficult for some of us in this huge country where we have relations with a billion other countries to understand just how powerful and how significant this change is for Cuba.